everybody. We'll get started. My name is Vinh, Nguyen, and I am a director, choreographer, educator. I live in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I got a call from Andre about 3 months ago asking me to be part of this panel. And we are doing preparing our students of color for the ride the waves of musical theater business. And of course I said yes. And I was also, when I knew Tim and Tony were going to be on the panel, of course, more reason to join. And then as of this last week, we were able to get a female person of color on the panel. Tim, and we thought that was so important that we include a woman of color in our panel, and here I am, so I'm moderating today. I just want to say a few things before I let our panelists introduce themselves. The purpose of this panel is to collaborate on ways to better prepare our students, especially our students of color, for the working world of musical theater. And we're going to try to focus it on education and mentorship. So we're not going to be talking about EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion in a broad spectrum, because that would be here all night. And so we're going to try and focus it down to mentorship and education. And then for the last 15 minutes of the session, we'll go ahead and we'll open up and we'll take some questions from the audience. Okay? So we'll go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Andre Garner. I teach at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And yeah, I guess the whole idea of this panel was thinking about the issues that I have seen at schools and talking with other faculty. It seems like one of the biggest issues or obstacles or hurdles I've encountered with students is pigeonholing. I found that there are a lot of students, I've had students come to me, students of color come to me, and I remember having one conversation particularly. It was a baritone African-American man, and he was, I just happened to be, we're talking about auditions, and I was like, well, what's in your book? And he was reading off the songs in his book, and I'm like, why does it seem like every song is a 45-year-old black man? It's like he had the Brownstone Spiritual Songbook or something. And so I just got to thinking, well, you don't have any, I don't see any golden age. It was all very, very narrow in the songs that it had. So, and I've encountered that with other students of color as well. And so it's like, when I saw that, it made me even more determined that in classes where I'm assigning songs, if I have an African-American female, I'm not just giving her daddy's son, she's right? I mean, she could do a little bit of love, wonderful talent. She could do, there are a lot of different songs, and I just feel like as teachers, certainly as advocates, we want to make sure that we prepare the students of color to be versatile, to sing different singing styles. And I know this is not a contentious subject, because I'm sure everyone in here feels the same way, but I just think we need to be mindful of it. And there, even as well as in casting, there's also pigeonholing in casting, where a lot of students, they feel like they don't get experience playing any roles other than those prescribed for people of color. And that's another sticky wicket that seems to be an issue. And something even bigger than that I found is more important, because when I knew I was doing this panel, I reached out to quite a few students of color, asking them their dream roles, what do they see themselves doing that's playing right now, and it was, to an alarming degree, they all said characters that were of color. They couldn't imagine that they would be playing someone other than in Once on This Island, or Tina, or whatever's playing right now, and I just thought, well, I'm so happy that I'm in the position that I am, because in my career, I've been lucky to sing a lot of different styles. And so I want our students to know, students of color particularly, to know that they have options, that they don't have to just huck-a-buck, they don't just have to riff and rap and belt. They need to cultivate all the different styles that are afforded to them. Much like, I mean, I don't feel like that's an issue when it comes to their Caucasian people. So that's a major component of what I see happening right now.
And we'll delve more into it as we
Yeah.
go along as well.
Hi, I'm Kim Varhola. I just came in from Korea last night, so forgive me if I'm not quite all there today. I am a former actress, musical theater actress, obviously Asian American. I currently teach theater arts and musical theater at K-Myeong University in Daegu, South Korea. In Korea, we have no students of color. Everybody is one color. And, you know, 98, I mean, and I say that to be funny, but in actuality, 98% of the population in Korea is ethnically Korean. So when I mean that there is nobody of color, I mean there is nobody of color. So, and I know that many of you are, or some of you have, you know, some international students who are coming from places other than, you know, Caucasian countries. But it is an interesting thing, you know, growing up here as an Asian American actor, knowing the expectations placed upon you for what work you might be able to do. And then going over to Asia, to Korea, where, you know, the musical theater industry is huge there. And although there is a good amount of Korean domestic product that is being created, Korean musicals featuring Korean storylines, an overwhelming number of Western musicals and American musicals still dominate the playing field, most of which have actually none of which have any Korean characters in them. So you have students who are playing characters that they don't look like. And I'm going to get into more some specifics about, you know, one of the things that one of my obsessions is the idea of perception, you know, and how that, you know, how you perceive yourself and how the public perceives you has become sort of an obsession of mine, and I will continue to get into some of that as we get into the questions.
Hi, I'm Tony Horne. Most of you know me as Tony, but now I'm Antonio. I'm rebranding myself. I'm Antonio, and I currently teach at Hendrix College in Conway, Arkansas. It's about 1,200 students, a liberal arts school. But over the last 20 years, I have taught in 8 different institutions, and 3 of those I either ran or helped run the musical theater program. So I bring a whole bunch of different perspectives. None of those schools were HBCUs, so I never worked at a historically black college, which is a whole different thing. But with the rare student of color I've had in the musical theater program, I think I've had more in the acting side than I ever had in musical theater. So my perspectives will be coming from all the disciplines, not just the musical theater perspective.
And my name is Tim Espinosa. I am an actor, musical theater educator, director. I am the head of musical theater at Fullerton College right here in sunny Southern California, about an hour and a half up the 5 freeway. I'm fortunate because I have the ability to educate students, a populace of students where 55% of our student population is Latinx. And as a Latinx educator, I feel that is a great source of pride. It's something that I have the opportunity and the ability to work with students, and those students see themselves reflected in their mentor. About 6 years ago when I came to Fullerton, I was startled to find that the productions that were being produced were not indicative of the diverse population of the students that were attending the university that I taught at. And I made it a passion of mine to change that conversation. And so a lot of the conversation that I want to contribute to you today is going to talk about season selection and how we look at season selection and how does that mirror the population of our student body, and making sure that the students not only are seeing themselves represented in the material that they are performing in, but also, to speak to Andre's point, are seeing themselves beyond the color of their skin and more so the content of their character. And so I think that's where I want to kind of lead in with that conversation.
Great. We're so excited to have all of you. and came with your international perspective as well. Andre, let's start with you. Can you talk a little bit about preparing students of color versus preparing, how is that different than preparing their white counterparts?
So yes, because when this whole idea brainstorm came to me, I know I was thinking, wait a minute, what's a counter? Why is it any different to prepare a student of color versus his or her Caucasian peers, right? So I think it comes down to representation, ultimately. And as I advocate for students and mentor them, I talk to them a lot about the business. Now, when I moved, and I speak mostly from, I worked in New York for 25 years, so I speak very much about that, and I'm usually dealing with BFA students, and what they really want is to go to Broadway, right? That's the pinnacle of what a musical theater student, I think a lot of kids, that's where they want to go. But I feel like they need to be aware of what it is, of the business side of it, and how the composition or the demographics of the business, the people who are the decision makers and the people who are writing these stories. So what I did was I went and I looked at this year's season on Broadway, and I looked at the racial composition of the lyricists, composers, and the writers. Of all of those people involved with the season, there were 59 who are telling these stories. 59 people, writers, lyricists, and composers. Out of that 59, 53 were white. And then when you talk about the people, when they walk into auditions and who's going to be behind the table, who's making the choices, directors and choreographers, there were 49 different choreographers and directors on this year's season. And out of those 49, 43 were white. And there were 4 Latinx, but it was Lin-Manuel Miranda involved in 2, and Robert Lopez involved in 2. So you hear those numbers. And not only that, I looked at the 4 of the more prominent casting offices in New York. And so you've got Telsey and Company, you've got Tara Rubin and Associates, Lincoln Center, that's Daniel Swee, and also Roundabout, Jim Carnahan. There were 30 members of the Casting Society of America. 32. And I was 32, 30 were white. So not only are the people who are making the decisions that these students are walking into these rooms to audition for, hopefully, not only the people writing the stories are predominantly white, also the people who's deciding who's getting in the room are also predominantly white. Now, that does not mean that these people who are white are adamantly opposed to hiring talented students of color, right? Actors. But what it does is, there's something about walking in a room and seeing someone who looks like you. So with that with that dearth of people of color on the other side of the room, I think it's helpful and it's instructive for these students that we're sending out to audition to understand that this is the world that you're going into. So I found that a lot of the kids who I've talked to, they felt like because of this, they're much more interested in creating their own work, because then they're not as dependent on other people making the choices. But the roles that are, let's face it, I know in my family, I could have done this beautiful play or musical that was well received, well reviewed, but when I said I was a chorus boy in Broadway, oh yeah, we know what that is. So it's so recognizable to be on Broadway, but the avenue to get to Broadway, it's going to be different for actors of color, students of color, than it will be for their white peers. So that's a huge difference, I think.
So you're talking about representation on Broadway right now, but also like in the education leading up to it.
Well, Jonathan spoke to it this morning, right?
Right.
We're talking about representation, not just in MTEA. I mean, look, I'll be honest, it was hard for us to find to get people, and when I came up with the idea for this panel, it's like, who can I reach out to? And then I knew Tony, so I was like, Tony, do you know anyone? Do you know anyone who are parts of MTEA? But that's the fact that you speak to that, Jonathan, the fact that you speak to, it's a mission.
It's acknowledging it.
It's right, and it's also, and in academia, we all know that academia is very, very monochromatic. So I mean, and I'll throw this out there too. When I moved to New York in 1997, there was a certain idea of what, of the goal of being an actor on Broadway, and what you were going to see. I felt like it was much different then. So to say that there hasn't been progress, I think that's not true. It's unproductive, but it's also not true, because there are people who have managed to overcome. Audra McDonald was not Audra McDonald in 19. There was no Audra McDonald in 19. Well, I guess was there Pearl Bailey once. But I mean, we couldn't speak to Audra. We couldn't speak to Lin-Manuel. We couldn't speak to there's been progress, but when we can get to the point where we're not saying, oh, this person, I mean, Norm Lewis was the first African-American Phantom of the Opera, right? Has it been a second?
Yes.
Yes.
When was that?
Last year.
Last year.
Who was that?
Yes.
Who, do we know?
First.
I think Robert Young was the first.
Robert Young, but he was in LA. He did in
Andrew said in the room, Andrew said to Norm, if I had known, and Norm finished the sentence, that a black guy could sing Phantom in New York, he would have hired me 30 years ago.
Oh, really? Yeah, well, how are you going to know that if he didn't get in front of you? If you say there's not someone who could have done it. I don't know. But anyway, when we get to the point where we're not saying the first of something, and it's notable, that's when we know that we are moving. I think I was having that conversation with Sherry yesterday about that. So, yeah.
I think we touch a little bit on assigning rep that is not specific to the race of your student. Can we all speak a little bit about that? Your experience working with that? Anybody?
Sure, yes.
I talked to them.
So, I think much of the rep that, to speak to Andre really briefly, just to kind of catapult off that, his comment from earlier, I believe that many of our students of color have this idea that, I need to do this what I call the bread and butter choices, the bread and butter material, which is, if I am from the Latinx community, I should be looking at Evita, Man of La Mancha, and then these certain shows like In the Heights and even Hamilton in some regards. But I think it's important that we need to change the conversation in the classroom about that idea. It is important that they understand their bread and butter material, but let's go beyond that. Let's look at not just the color, the pigmentation of their skin. Let's look at their voice type. Let's look at how they see themselves represented beyond the typical choices that they're naturally going to know they're right for. When we start to allow those conversations to take place in the classroom, that's when we will facilitate a more universal conversation about picking repertoire and material. If we encourage our students to step outside of their preconceived notion of who they are, then the conversation, I feel, will begin to change outside of the academic arena. And a point of pride for me is that I most recently just finished directing a production of Bright Star, and I got to work with the amazing Sherry Sanders, who came out and spent a week with our students. And I'll speak to the season selection stuff in a little bit, but it just speaks to the fact that I wanted to pick a cast that was uniquely diverse, exceptionally diverse, with a show that has a tradition of not being, if we can all agree. It has been traditionally cast through a very specific lens. And a lot of conversations came up about, how is Alice Murphy going to be seen as a woman of color in that role? Right. And without making race the actual conversation, I told my students, I want the best person to come out for the role, but also I want to see a diverse population of students represented in this cast. And so I happened to have a beautifully talented young woman of color come out and audition, and she was spectacular. And it was so interesting because in that process, we had, I think, 2 Caucasian members in the cast, and the rest were all either of Latinx descent or African American descent. And it just brought this interesting dynamic and this belief that they are so much more than what the perceptions of the shows are in the past. And I just want to go back to the repertoire question, that I think we need to remind our students that yes, they should know their bread and butter material, but there's such a greater diverse array of content that they can pull from that goes beyond the pigmentation of their skin. And I think the more we reinforce that in the classroom, the better our students are going to be off, and the more confident our students are going to be going into the room saying, yes, I can play Alice Murphy. I can play these roles that traditionally weren't cast for me, but now I'm going to go in and make that, I'm going to change that conversation in the audition room. And sometimes the actor needs to do that for the director or the choreographer or the editor.
But isn't that where, isn't college, university is where that should happen?
Mm-hmm.
More so than, right? Because you're not under the constraints of box office, commercialism, all those things, right? It's academic. So it's all about nurturing the artist from the inside out, right? So it doesn't matter. You would hope that it doesn't.
To sort of speak to both of those things, and to add on to that, my last name is Varhola. Varhola is, my great-grandparents on my father's side came from Slovakia. I'm actually biracial, which not many people would realize if you just looked at me. I grew up in central Pennsylvania, in farm country. 2 weeks out of the year we spent with my mother's extended family, the Korean side of the family, but the rest of my upbringing was around my dad's family. I grew up on the same diet of Judy Garland and Gene Kelly and barbershop harmony. My identification of wanting to be in musical theater had very little to do with the fact that there were no Asian or Asian American role models. Actually had more of the fact to do with, I didn't think of myself as any different. It really wasn't until I got to college that I didn't get cast, my senior year of college, I didn't get cast as one of the main characters in Sweet Charity, that I had a moment of going, wait a minute, is that because I don't look like one of them? Really was the first time. My youth, I grew up thinking I'm gonna be Dolly Levi. We laugh because I don't look like one, right? My whole professional career was doing Asian American shows. Flower Drum Song, Pacific Overtures, the Aiko, Alexi Darling role in Rent, okay? And that's great. And the thing is, I've had a great career. The complexity of, I think, about teaching students of color is that we give them the opportunity to find out who their inner real character is, to find their Dolly Levi, to identify that. And yet still have to say, when you get out there, you need to know what stuff people are going to cast you in. And you need to know what things you are willing to do for those characters. I won't do accents. Like, I physically won't do accents. It's just, I don't have a judgment of doing accents. I just won't, I won't do accents. My husband, who is Korean American, who is a musical theater actor, he will do accents. And he's done work that required accents and has made money, doing that. And that's okay. It is okay for me to say, I'm not gonna do a Chinese accent. I don't know, And it's okay for him to say, I will, And I think that's, when allowing the student of color to sort of explore who they are, what is expected of them, and then make the decision for themselves about what they're willing to do, which is their prerogative to decide, I think is really important. And it's difficult to guide that sometimes, but,
Since we're on that topic of public versus self-perception, can you talk about how that translates into the classroom or your education, educating in
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a different, this conversation honestly is not a conversation that necessarily occurs in the classroom in Korea because, like I said, we don't have racial diversity. I have like 3 Chinese students and everybody else is Korean, and what happens, what ends up being a differentiating factor is really the language. It's not an outward appearance. That being said, there are types. There are types even among one color. But I think because I've got the luxury of having, sort of one color, is that we are more focused on, well, are you a leading lady or an ingenue? Or what's your voice type? Or do you sing rock? Or do you sing, standards better? And so that becomes more of the conversation.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I did the Bay Area premiere of Allegiance in San Francisco, and it was the first time that there was an all-Asian, that I was in an all-Asian American cast. And from there, I'm like, whoa, I'm not the quirky best friend.
Yeah.
That's weird. I get to play a leading role. So that to your point of like, within the Asian American community, there are students who fit into different types.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting that you brought that up, because within the show they're all the types, but they all just happen to be the same race.
Right. I've been pushed for 25 years to be Kim in Saigon. I can't do Kim.
Just want to throw one little thing.
Yeah.
One thing that refreshes me, for years in Milwaukee, I used to go judge the musicals for the Musical Theater Awards. So in the Milwaukee area, there's a lot of diversity, but in some areas not. But for 3 years, I went to all the musicals, and it was so exciting to see students of different colors playing all the different parts in a repertoire, right? So they have the clarity that they can do it. They have the expectation that they will do it. So when those kids, this generation that's 15 now, comes to college, they're expecting that they will have that opportunity, and it is incumbent upon us to make sure they have that opportunity, but more later.
Yeah. Okay. Tim, you mentioned earlier about recruitment and season selection. Let's talk about that for a little bit. I love that Andres touched a little bit on creating new works where there's more opportunities. The rules aren't as strict, with racial implications, so that anyone can fill these roles. Can you talk about your selection process?
Sure, I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience. So I spoke earlier about the fact that when I came to Fullerton College about 6 years ago, I was startled to find out in the history of the shows there had been, with a population of students that was 55% Latinx, being from various Latin American speaking countries throughout Latin America. I was startled to find that there were no shows that had been selected to represent them. And so one of the first shows I ever directed at Fullerton College was Federico Garcia Lorca's production, A Bodas de Sangre. I directed it 50-50 in English and in Spanish, and we had both Latinx students and we had Caucasian students, both a part of this production. And I set out with a mission, and we brought in the Spanish department to collaborate with our production, and it opened up a beautiful conversation about empathy for our students that had never experienced the Latin culture, Latinx culture, or the Spanish language. We had every single one of our students, whether they could speak Spanish or not speak Spanish, get a crash course on Spanish 1 and learn the language, learn the eloquence, and we even took it a step farther. They learned Catalan, which is the actual language, the vernacular that they would have used in this region, at this part of the show. So to have the students, both from the Latinx experience and from those non-Latinx students, come together and experience a piece of theatrical entertainment that one of the Latinx students finally got to celebrate their culture and see themselves reflected. My non-Latinx students learned the value of collaborating and coexisting with different, varying groups of people. And it was a fascinating experience because in our post-mortem, many of them have walked away saying, I'm a changed person because I view diversity differently now, having gone through this experience. And that was very telling for me because that hadn't happened in the past. And so that was just one experience. And I wanted to make sure I chose some of the season, yes, maybe has to do with the diverse population of our students, but also making sure that there are roles available for students that aren't dictated by the color of their skin, that they are roles that they can play, they can see themselves in and step into, and I don't want to use that word non-traditional sense, because I think we're trying to move away from that idea of non-traditional, but in that way. And by creating a holistic season that allowed students of color to audition for all 4 of our shows without just being like, I can only audition for 1 or 2, all of a sudden, the conversation has now changed tremendously. And ever since then, my colleagues and I, we make sure that our students of color can audition and be a part of every single production that they are in, whether it be Shakespeare or whether it be musical theater. There is a place for them to be represented and seen. And not only that, when we do our general overview orientation, our welcome orientation at the beginning of the season, we have a conversation with our entire body of students within the theater department. We tell them, we believe in promoting greater inclusion and diversity. We want to see every one of you come out, and we walk that walk. We say we will be casting students of color in non-traditional ways to make sure that you are heard and you are seen and you are represented. And it's been really great to see, the aftermath of that experience over the last 3 years in our season selection. But it takes the faculty coming together and saying, we need to change the conversation about how we're choosing our season and making sure that there is a balance and there are opportunities for our students of color to see themselves in roles outside of the pigmentation of their skin. Yeah.
I just wanted to comment, you would think that all departments say this out loud and mean it and even have it in print, but they don't. And this is why I wanted to comment on my alma mater, and I'm going to call them out, the University of Memphis doesn't say that and do that. And the black students, there are no Latino students at the moment, feel uncomfortable because they're not quite sure should they audition for these roles. I was fortunate to be raised being cast regardless of race. I have always done it as a teacher. And some of you have heard this story if you've known me a long time. One of my first jobs, I was doing little night music, and there were black students, Latinx students, white students, and I cast that way. But I suggested to a black girl that she auditioned for this role, and she said, well, I can't play that. I said, who told you that? She goes, well, that's a family. I said, girl, this is not even real. It's a musical. That was misguided and narrow-minded, but it reaffirmed the way I had been raised, which was it didn't matter, and it reaffirmed what I was doing, that it was right, but you have to say it. So when I first got to Milwaukee, they said it, and we walked the walk the whole time. The problem was, and here's the flip side, we were mostly white school with students of color on the side, right, a few, but the acting faculty kept wanting to do shows that were specific, right, and we only had this many students of color, and it became clear that they were just going to get cast even if they were making C's, right, because they had to do the show. So the Latinx faculty member and me, we had to say, hey, stop. You're giving them roles just because they're not white now, and that's the wrong way to go. So we had to break away from that completely. I don't think we ever did a musical where race was important in terms of casting the whole 10 years that I was part of the season selection, and that was why, because we didn't have enough that we didn't want people to feel like they were getting a role just because they showed up and they were not white.
Well, and I'll say this, at Ball State, we've had some really, really tough discussions because on that topic, when the season comes out and you have a group of students, like we have this organization, the Ethnic Theater Alliance. So they were given a voice to be able to speak of, well, what is it you're looking for as far as of us promoting diversity? And so the students came together and they came up with this idea that we would have a play that would be designated each year, that would be written by, and the cast would be students of color. But what happened was, after a while, they're like, well, we know which play we're going to be in, so why are we even auditioning? So that's the conundrum, right? It's like, how do you, and from each year to the next year, these groups of students will want other things that would contradict the one before. So it does make decision making that much tougher, because when you're sensitive to it as a faculty, as an administration, and you're trying to do a thing that you think is going to be met with at least showing that you're trying, showing that you're walking the walk, right? But when you have this constant, like, well, shit, I can't do this right, and now this isn't right, we're trying to do this thing. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop trying. I think that's the message, because we have to remember as well that we're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old people. So we have to feel like we're doing what we feel is best for them. But when we're talking about students of color and we're trying to promote an atmosphere of inclusion, and I think the remedy is open up the casting so that it is non-traditional, so that we do see people playing a role. Like you said, it's make-believe. Why are we trying to say, oh, they look alike, so they should play brother and sister? I mean, really? It's not as important as really reinforcing the idea that this is academia and it's educational. If we remember it's educational, I think that'll always lead us in the right direction.
And just to speak to your point, there was an attempt when we came in by colleagues, good-hearted attempt to say, we are going to pick a diverse show. We're going to have of the season be the diverse show. What we found was, after that season in our post-mortem, was that we had actually marginalized our students of color with good intention, accidentally marginalized our students by saying, that's the show for you. Versus,
kind of like utopianism, right?
Yeah.
We like to say ghettoized.
Oh,
You
ghettoized.
and they're ghetto.
And that was the season that we did a Lopa de Vega production, and so all of our students of color, Latinx students, gravitated towards that show. We hired a Latinx guest director to come in. And we wanted to create through that window. And what happened was all of our students of color did not audition for the other 3 shows.
Right.
And so now we have this them versus us kind of mentality that's starting to exist. And we needed to nip that in the bud immediately. And so immediately the next season at our general orientation, that's when that conversation started about, we are about this. And for all of you that are waiting and in the sidelines to be heard and to be seen, this season is for you. And for everyone in this chair, you are expected and welcome to come and audition for every role that is available, that you see yourself right for. And thankfully, that is now the culture of what exists, and I think that's the ideal way to look at season selection and go about working with your students of color in terms of casting.
I think it's also very important to acknowledge that there is a history of oppression and silencing that people of color have been experiencing. So to tell them and like speaking up is not something that, especially Asian students who are a little bit shyer. So the idea of mentorship and advocacy is something that I think is also very important, that goes hand in hand with the educating of the next generation. I'd love to talk about that a little bit. Are there ways that you guys use to kind of help that along? Can you guide your students to speak up for themselves, to learn how to say no to certain roles that might jeopardize the trajectory of their career?
Well, this is tough because we all have ways, but most of our faculties do not have people of color on them. So how does that happen when there is no faculty of color? Because they're going to come to us first. So the first thing I'm going to say is that everybody in this room, and I think most of us are trying to do this, we have to let the students know that we are there for them, so that they are not uncomfortable coming forward to be mentored about issues that deal with race or gender or whatever. But if you don't say it, they don't know. And they're scared because they think there's going to be backlash. So we have to let them know that it's safe to do that. But what I was going to say is, when students do come to me, I say, you can say no to anything, because no one can make you do the accent. No one can tell you to be more black. No one can tell you those things. You can say no, but also they get trotted out. You know what I mean? If you're faculty of color, they want you in every brochure. They want you to do the special events. They want you to do all this stuff. And you are afraid to say no because you're afraid that they will be angry with you and they won't cast you anymore. So I think, and I would tell a student that that's the risk we're going to take, right? You speak up for yourself, you say why, but also say that you're willing to play and do all these things, but just not those things, and here's why. I think they have to be able to speak up. But if we don't let them know that there's someone on our side, even if they're not our color, that's when the anger festers and it becomes people talking under the surface and not wanting to bring things out on the table. So to create this culture of open discussion. But I think that's one thing. But the other thing was advocating. How do you advocate when you get out, right? How do you advocate? And I think you've addressed a lot of this in terms of how we can present ourselves, particularly before New York. It's easier to do in the regions now than ever. It's easier to do so that you do get to New York sometimes with this diverse resume. So I think making sure they know that. Now I say that, and then my student, one of my African American students has played Joanne in Rent literally 5 times, right? And she's doing the Gospel at Colonus, and she's doing Once on This Island. All the roles she couldn't do at school and that were not even in her book. That's what people are paying her to do because they're trying to show diversity in their seasons and they want to hire black artists. So she got pigeonholed. But she is also aware that she can say no. She's also aware that she can advocate for herself as a 6-foot-tall woman, as a black woman, as a woman of a certain size, that she will not allow herself to be pigeonholed because she is the artist and she has to be able to love herself enough, no matter what happens, to be able to say no, to also be able to say this is who I can be, this is who I have played, and this is what I'm willing to play. And to take whatever it comes. I think we have to be telling it's okay to be brave, to take whatever comes, and not feel like you have to grovel.
And you're educating and creating an artist rather than a person of color.
Exactly.
Right. Your race should not be your winning factor of getting cast, right? Tim, do you have anything?
I was just going to say, and that therein lies the challenge with many programs that lack the diversity amongst their faculty, that the students of color that we have are unsure to come up to a faculty member that is not of their race and say, you know, I have these feelings. I'm experiencing this from this perspective, and this is the reason why recruiting a diverse group of faculty is so important. One, to help facilitate a greater conversation about diversity amongst the students, but also so those students of color can come to their mentors and say, I'm having this experience. And I know that's something I'm so blessed to have, working with so many Latinx students, is that we can share stories. And history, you know, of what it was coming up as a student and what the industry was like for a Latinx person 25 years ago versus now, the after Lin-Manuel Miranda effect, you know. And it's been, I think, ensuring that we're recruiting faculty, diverse faculty, so that these conversations, the teaching about how to arm yourself, how the students should arm themselves in the real world, and what to say no to, what to say yes to, and how to say no in a safe way, and how to stand up for themselves.
I think, again, many of our faculties do not have people of color on them. And we talked about creating this safe space, but also, you don't have to be the expert. They need to know that you will admit that you don't know, but they also need to know that you're willing to understand and that you have done a bit of homework. I mean, I got lazy. All the black kids came to me and all the Latinx kids went to the Latin faculty. And I'm not equipped, right? Because I didn't do my homework. So if someone came to me of a different race now, I'm not equipped as a black man to help them because I haven't looked into their culture or the specificity of their ethnic group. And that's my job too. It's all of our jobs, so that it's not just that we make it so they can come to us, we make them understand that we are willing to learn and that we have done some homework. It's really a sign of respect. And if they know you respect them and their culture, the whole thing shifts for the better.
Well, and I will say, because on my faculty, that there is a faculty member who I always call, I say, you're the wokest white man I've ever met. And all of and he does, and I feel that there is an understanding and a matter of respect to not just how he talks, but how he acts. And I think all the students respond to that, and I think that that's how we want to lead. That's how we want to be, I think.
Well, and the other, you know, again, where ethnic diversity is not a thing in Korea, but Gender is a very big thing in Korea. I mean, I'm the only woman on my team, in my faculty. I'm the only American, I'm the only woman in an industry that is overwhelmingly male, because ticket sales are driven by male stars in Korea. And when I mean overwhelmingly male, there are some shows that literally, in an ensemble of 40 people, there are no women in the ensemble. So when I say overwhelmingly male, I mean overwhelmingly male. And of course, but in an educational setting where majority women, you know, you still have a majority of women who are in your artistic, you know, studies. And looking at roles, okay, you know, looking at, my husband was singing, he was prepping for some concert, and he was singing All I Ask of You, right, with the duet from Phantom of the Opera, and I was singing along, helping him, and I was singing the lyrics, and I'm like, are those really the lyrics? Have you thought about some of these lyrics? Like, say the word and I will follow you. Like, this is what Christine says. She says, you know, what else? Yeah, she says, you know, to guard me and to guide me. You know, I'm saying this to my husband. I'm like, really? These are the lyrics? But none of us would turn down the role of Christine. To guard you and to guard me and to guide me. You know, and and this is not the only, you know, and this is not, you know, we don't think about this role as being a stereotypically weak woman, but these roles are women, or, you know, roles for women are written. Some of them are still, you know, they're written this way, or, you know, one of the things we talk about in my classroom, you know, there's just so many token prostitute roles. Yeah, right? So, and again, in a predominantly male society, well, in a predominantly male industry, which is the Korean musical industry, and in an entertainment industry that still, you know, for those of you who follow K-pop, sexualizes women, okay? And that's a whole other discussion. But, you know, how do you address these characters, you know, these stereotypical female characters? And so we talk about the people and the humanity of the character, despite what they might be singing. You know, we talk about Lucy and Jekyll and Hyde, despite the fact that she's saying, you know, let's bring on the men and let the fun begin. She can be saying those words, but what's really going on beneath that? You know, why is she saying that? And so to find the universal humanity among these, you know, characters who are female, who have to say these lines, but might be thinking something else, to find the universality. Thank you. Among characters who are of different color, but, you know, having an actor of one color play a character of another color, finding the identification with that, the humanity of that. I think, you know, encouraging that is an interesting topic.
Usually when I talk to my students, I say diversity is more, not less. And I'd love to empower students of, you know, everybody, not just people of color, that they have power to be an ally and to change and to work with us and to educate. We would love to open it up to the floor and kind of give you, yeah, please.
I want to return to something that you said early on, which is that the road to Broadway is different for people of color. Can you elaborate?
Well, I'm saying the road to Broadway. Did I say the road to Broadway?
You did. I think so. I wrote it down.
The road to Broadway. That means when I say that is, when you talk about representation, if you have feeling accessible, feeling when you walk in the room that I'm seeing someone who looks like me, who maybe understands my experience. It has nothing to do with whether you're hired or not necessarily. It's just your mindset and your feeling, the comfortability. I guess I equate it with, there's a reason why they changed juries to be a jury of your peers. That's kind of how I equate it.
This is a little bit on Antonio's point. If we're all seen as educators, and for those of us who work in less diverse collegial environments, if our job is, and backing also off Andre's point about those bread and butter roles, if we also want to make sure that our students of color have as wide an accessibility to employment upon graduating, because we know that the market is tight, how do we, or should we, make sure that if it's teaching in Avenue Q, or if it's teaching Old Man River, how do we make, or Porgy and Bess, that fall into specific bread and butter canons? How do we respectfully teach that? To say, okay, you may choose to never do this, but you will be cast where I would not. Just so that you have, to empower them to have these options, but know that if we're educators, we have, is this our job to do this? And should it be? And how so? I mean, this might be an amazing way to say, well, let's add this to the website that, you know, Antonio is now, oh, I'm a resource here in Arkansas if you have a question, because I don't have a person of color who can, you know, yes, I can research it, I love Porgy and Bess. But a student might say, well, I know, written by white Jews, but. I'm like, well, there's my people, but
Like most of them.
no. But you know, how do we do this today when there is so much sensitivity?
I think we have to ask the student, they know what their bread and butter roles are, they know the shows that make them excited, and we say, what is it that you would like to learn that's in your voice range that you think would be a role that you'll get cast as your bread and butter role versus the other things. They know, the kids know. But if you ask them rather than tell them, or to ask them to come up with a list of songs and you all work through it together, I would never ask that. They used to give me songs at school that were about Sammy Davis Jr. sang not in shows, but in concerts. And I was like, oh, I like this. Oh, Sammy sang that. And I was insulted, right? But I think we have to include them in the process.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to speak to the same point. It's a joint conversation that we're having with the students, as opposed to dictating what their material is going to be.
I never dictate, but we also, if employability is a goal, how do we open the conversation and say, you as a black man are going to be, you have these 8 shows that you as a white man do not.
Yeah.
So you have something to say, Sherry?
Oh, I just want to offer an addition to this. I think it's like what we would say to anybody who is queer and they have to act straight, and whatever it is, we say we want you to be able to work on material that is going to be what you're going to be cast as, typically the bread and butter stuff, and also completely explore your inner terrain so that you become marketable and castable as a human being in the world. And I think that comes from taking us out of the type or stereotype and into the world of who we are and what point of view we have on the world. So I think it's both, isn't it?
I think that speaks to Sherry's point, is the fact that we are going to have that conversation at the onset of our MT classes, saying, yes, there are going to be times when we give you this material because we want to have this conversation with you, but also there's such a wide array of diverse material to choose from. As long as you're not going, you know, I'm going to pick my 15 songs for my students and my one student of color is going to be doing, you know, Dream Girls, going to be color purple, and, you know, then you're
none of us are doing that.
And I agree.
It's more just how we teach it.
Right. But I think starting with a conversation from the onset, I think is an important thing.
See, and I actually though, because I wouldn't be opposed to actually mandating students to have an assignment where they have to pick something that is not their bread and butter. Or you know, turn it around, or do the duet from Kinky Boots and have a white Lola and a black Charlie. Mandate it. Let them stand in the other person's shoes. And that goes for everybody.
If you can't do it here, where else can you do it, right?
You know?
Yes.
I wanted to talk back to something that Kim had mentioned before about related to a student's perception of their own identity versus how the rest of the world sees them. And I'll just kind of give you the 2 cases that I have in my head right now and just let you respond to them. One is a student that I started working with this year, and we were looking through her book, and she had, I think she probably had It Won't Be Long Now in her book. to look at her, she presents as Caucasian. Her last name is like Burkhart. You know, there's nothing to know that she might have any Latinx ancestry. So I asked her about it. She said, well, I don't know if I should have this in my book because people won't see me as that. My dad is, I forget what culture, but my dad is, I don't really know that part of my family very much, but I would like to explore that part of myself more. So she doesn't necessarily identify as that, but she maybe could. So that's one. And then the other is a friend of mine who has played Usnavi a bunch of times. He's Greek. He feels very connected to that community. He feels like he knows Usnavi based on his experience growing up, and he recently did a production where he was in the ensemble, and the person playing Usnavi is genetically Colombian, but was adopted and raised by Polish people, and to my friend's perspective, knows nothing about that culture, but because of his DNA feels that he has the right to play this role, and I don't. And I just wonder if you would all respond to some of this.
Yeah, you know, talking about New York and passability, I used to have in my book, aside from Saigon and Flower Drum Song, there wasn't anything when I was, auditioning in New York. So one of the things I used to use a lot was from Thoroughly Modern Millie, Only in New York, which was sung by Shirley Ralph. I booked work doing that song, which is not something that you would expect me to sing, because when I sang it, it fit me.
It felt real.
It felt real. And my husband is Korean American. He was the original Frankie in Allegiance. And one of the reasons we moved to New York, or moved to Seoul, is because my husband had been invited 15 years ago to do Miss Saigon, the Korean premiere of Miss Saigon in New York, to play the American soldier. Okay, yeah. But it was in Korean, and my husband is Korean American and therefore bilingual. Okay? And the thing is, everybody in Miss Saigon in Korea is Korean. Yeah, okay, it's a trip. Oh my gosh, it's a trip. But he was invited to play that role. And then we went back every other year because they revived shows quite a lot in Korea. And then was asked 7 years ago to play Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar, which in fact he's done here in the States several times. So he's been cast non-traditionally as Jesus, but that made him a star in Korea. He is doing all of these roles in Korea that he would never necessarily do here. There are also Western teams that come to Korea, from Australia, from London, who work with him there and have actually said, gosh, would never occur to us that Tick in Priscilla could be of Asian American background, but you know what, it doesn't matter. So I would say, if he identifies as Usnavi, he should sing the song. I think having those in there, I am a firm believer of just having stuff that speaks to you. That's the most important thing, in my opinion.
Sorry, go ahead.
If a Caucasian woman can belt for Jesus, she's got a big voice, she can walk in and sing a song that's written for a person of color. It's about the sound, it's about the style, it's about the person, right? If you've got that tool, you can do it. Just like if you have a person of color who has a beautiful lyric tenor, they can come in and sing a song that's from the songbook. So it doesn't really matter ultimately, I think. But I just think what we need to remember is that the students should have that ability to do it all. And that we don't prescribe, or we don't allow them to self-prescribe limitations.
Well, I'm so excited that this discussion was here at the beginning of the session so that we can have the whole weekend. And we want to say thank you to all. about these things because that's how change happens. So thank you so much. Enjoy your lunch.
Sir.